Have you ever seen a door swing open at the very moment it should have stayed shut? Not the ordinary sound of hinges in a quiet house, but something startling, like fate itself was pushing secrets out into the open. That was the exact instant Clara Monroe froze on the threshold, her breath catching, her eyes wide at the sight before her. Steam rolled out of the room, curling into a mist that made everything half hidden, half revealed, like one of those whispered frontier tales passed around campfires, a secret she was never meant to see. Before we ride deeper into this story, let me pause a moment and speak to you, our loyal listeners who have followed so many Western tales of sweat, blood, and destiny. If you've ever had a moment that made your heart stop cold, a moment that made your boots falter right at the threshold, press that like button to keep these stories alive. And if you're listening from your front porch at home, or from a quiet room after a long day, let me know in the comments. Your words are the embers that keep these fires burning. I promise, if you stay with me until the end, you'll hear not only about a letter that sealed a man's fate, but about the moment a heart thought long turned to stone came alive again. Now let's return to that room. Clara wasn't only startled by what she saw the man she had always known as cold, distant, his hands marked with calluses, but by the reason she was standing there in the first place. In her grip was a thin sheet of paper, trembling, damp from sweat and steam. A letter from the Territorial Land Office, handed to her 3 days earlier by the post rider in town. She should have given it to Elias Ward the moment she got back. Instead, she had hidden it away, reading it again and again until every word burned itself into her mind like a brand. 30 days. The phrase stared back at her, harsh and merciless. 30 days for Elias Ward to prove his right to the land he had worked with his bare hands for 3 years. 30 days before everything he'd built was stripped away by men waiting like vultures on the ridge. Clara was supposed to be nothing more than a hired girl cooking, cleaning, keeping her head down. Her place in this house was simple and clear. He was the master, she the servant. He gave orders. She obeyed, like two dancers who knew their steps and never strayed from the pattern. But the moment that door swung open, those steps shattered like glass beneath a wagon wheel. Elias Ward, the man who always kept his distance, stood there, silent. And for the first time, she saw something unguarded in him. His eyes dark. Storm cloud eyes fell on the paper in her hand, and in that thick steam, the air between them felt heavy, suffocating. Clara's heart hammered, each beat loud as a drum in her chest. The paper crackled in her shaking fingers, sharp and brittle in the silence. She knew, the moment she spoke, nothing would be the same again. This wasn't just delivering a letter. This was a warning, a confession, a step that might bind their fates together, whether either of them wanted it or not. Clara had stood outside that door for 10 long minutes, gathering courage like a soldier, taking one last breath before stepping onto the battlefield. And now, with everything laid bare, there was no turning back. Mr. Ward, her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. There's something you need to know. In his eyes, she caught at a flicker, a shudder. Not just surprise at her presence in such a private moment, but the dim recognition that the paper in her hand carried a storm ready to sweep away everything he had built. Think about it for a moment. Friends, if you were Clara, would you have had the courage to speak then and there, or would you have turned back, swallowed the truth, and let the man face ruin at the hands of others? That is the question that begins our journey tonight, a journey filled with shock, fear, and choices that will decide the future of 2 lives bound by chance and by fate. There are secrets that, once spoken, don't just make your voice tremble, they wrap a noose of dread around the throat of everyone who hears them. Clara Monroe knew that well, and her lips went dry as she tried to repeat what she had overheard back in town. The steamy room that only moments ago felt stifling now seemed to turn cold, as if the very wooden walls of the ranch house leaned in to listen. Elias Ward stood frozen, a towel at his waist, every muscle taut beneath his skin. Clara drew a deep breath. Her hands clenched so tightly her nails left pale marks across her palms. 3 days ago, when I went to town for supplies, I heard them. Her voice shook, but her eyes had hardened with resolve. Harland Pierce, Jonas Harker, and Silas Crowe. They were standing in front of the general store, thinking no one was paying attention. But I heard every word. They're planning. Elias raised his head, his dark eyes narrowing. What did they say? Clara swallowed hard. The memory of those voices returned like a waking nightmare. Pierce said they'd arranged for a surveyor, someone they'd paid off to file a false report. They claimed your boundary markers on the east side were placed wrong, that your line cut into Pierce's grazing land. And once the territorial office got that report, you wouldn't stand a chance. They'd force you off this ranch. A draft slipped through the window, making the fire in the stove flare and crackle. Clara shivered. In her mind, she could still hear Jonas Harker's dry laugh. See the way he twirled his reins as though always ready to cinch it tight around the neck of any wild beast, Harker said. Once that surveyor puts pen to paper, Ward's finished. He'll have no choice but to bow down to us. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Elias stepped to the window, staring out across the east pasture. Beyond the cottonwood stretched 3 years of sweat, blood, and solitude. Now all of it could be swept away with a few strokes of a crooked pen. Clara pressed on, though her heart thundered in her chest. I heard something else. It isn't just about grazing land, or jealous neighbors. Pierce mentioned the railroad. Elias turned sharply, eyes flashing. The railroad. She nodded. They said once the line comes through this valley, the land will be worth a fortune. They don't intend for you, a man living out here alone, to claim that fortune. They'd rather break you, turn you into a hired hand on your own soil, than let you keep it. At that moment, fear seemed to seep into the very bones of the house. Even the distant bawling of cattle outside carried an uneasy note, like a warning before a storm. Clara felt the terror rising in her veins, not just that Elias might lose his land, but that the 3 men, with their wealth and power, would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Elias's hands curled into fists, his knuckles pale. I measured every acre myself when I filed the claim. The markers are deep, secure. They cannot simply vanish. They can be moved, replaced. And the papers will say otherwise, Clara replied, her voice trembling as much as her breath. Pierce boasted the surveyor was kin to Crowe, his brother-in-law. Blood ties to guarantee loyalty. And once they draft that map, the territorial office won't question a thing. Clara couldn't hide her own dread anymore. She remembered the cold stare of Silas Crowe, those hawk-like eyes studying everything with predatory patience. Just recalling it made her chest tighten, as though some invisible rope was already pulling taut. Outside, the evening sun bled red across the sky, like spilled blood on the horizon. Elias's voice came low and ragged. They want to make me a laborer on my own land. Clara stepped closer, gripping her skirt to steady her shaking hands. They don't just want your land, Elias. They want to ruin you. And I fear they won't hesitate to hurt anyone who stands at your side. Her words fell into the room like a hammer striking iron. Fear and worry spread thick in the air, making the small ranch house feel as though it was swaying under the weight of an oncoming storm. And in Elias's eyes, Clara saw it plain from this moment forward. There was no turning back. The sound of hooves echoed from the distance like war drums, each strike against the earth announcing a confrontation no one could avoid. Clara Monroe felt her heart tighten as she listened, while Elias Ward stood rigid at the window, eyes fixed on the valley. Dust rose along the trail to the ranch, and within that cloud appeared three familiar silhouettes. Harland Pierce rode a chestnut stallion, his broad shoulders blotting out the horizon. Jonas Harker, wiry and restless, his eyes darting like a jackal's, and finally Silas Crowe, silent as a shadow, his thin smile sharp as a blade. "They came faster than I thought," Clara whispered, her hand clutching the edge of the table. Elias said nothing. His hand brushed the grip of the revolver at his hip. Then he turned slowly toward her. "Go to the kitchen. Don't let them see you here." His voice was steel, but Clara heard the worry beneath it. She nodded, slipping into the hallway's darkness. Just before she vanished, Elias called softly. "Clara." Only the second time he'd ever spoken her name, and it carried the weight of both gratitude and something like farewell. She gave a quick nod, then hurried toward the kitchen. Outside, the horses snorted as the men pulled up in the yard. The front door creaked open, and Elias stepped onto the porch, his stance as unyielding as a wall against the storm. "Fine evening." "Ward," Harland Pierce rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. "We came to talk about your land." "There's nothing to talk about," Elias answered, calm but firm. Jonas Harker let out a jagged laugh, sharp as a knife scraping metal. "Don't fool yourself. Tomorrow our surveyor comes, and when he's done, you'll have nothing left to stand on. But we're generous men." That was when Silas Crowe finally spoke, quiet but cutting. "We're here to give you an opportunity. Foreman of this ranch. Keep your house. Draw a wage. Hold on to a scrap of pride. Better than being thrown out with nothing." The air between them thickened, heavy enough to snap. From the kitchen window, Clara peeked out, her pulse hammering. Each word from the men felt like a hammer striking the walls of the house. Then she caught Pierce's eyes flick toward the porch, where her shadow had betrayed her presence. "And that little maid of yours," Pierce drawled, savoring the words. "Pretty thing. But when you lose this place, where will she go? Not easy for a girl with no references, no protector. Unless," his smirk widened, "unless she learns to depend on another man's kindness." Blood rushed hot into Clara's face. She gripped the window frame to keep from crying out. Elias didn't move, but his fists clenched, veins standing out like cords. For one terrible moment, Clara thought he would leap off the porch and draw his gun. But instead, he drew in a slow breath, his eyes dark as a storm. "Get off my land," he said, each word ground out like iron. "I won't sell. I won't work for you. And if you so much as touch anyone under this roof," his gaze cut like steel, "you'll pay for it." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Only the hiss of wind through the cottonwoods and the creak of saddle leather broke it. Jonas Harker gave a short, forced laugh. "You really think you can stand against the whole territory?" Silas Crowe's mouth curved faintly, his eyes glinting cold. "Tomorrow changes everything. Ward, remember that?" Pierce jerked his chin, and the three men wheeled their horses. The pounding of hooves thundered across the yard, then faded into the distance, leaving only a suffocating stillness behind. Clara released the window frame, her body trembling as though she had just escaped death. On the porch, Elias still stood unmoving, his silhouette dark against the dying light. It wasn't the posture of a beaten man. It was the stance of someone who knew the real battle had only begun. Inside her chest, Clara felt fear surge like a flood, but with it came a rush of fierce admiration. Elias had refused to bow, even with three powerful men pressing him. Yet the threat to her, the clear danger hanging over a woman alone on the frontier, now hung like a blade above them both. And in that instant, Clara understood this was no longer just about land or railroads. Their very lives had been dragged into the ruthless gamble. As the last rays of daylight slipped off the porch, Elias Ward tightened the reins and gave Clara Monroe a firm nod. "We need to find proof," he said, his voice steady, almost like a vow. Clara met his gaze, the fear of the earlier confrontation still pulsing inside her. Yet for the first time since she had come to this ranch, she saw something different in his eyes, trust. They rode out together beneath the fading glow of sunset. Elias led on his black stallion, while Clara followed on the gentle mare she usually rode to town. Hoofbeats echoed across the open pasture, mingling with the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods, a low music that seemed to draw them closer. "I set those stakes 4 feet deep," Elias explained as they crossed a small creek shimmering with gold, each one marked with stones piled over it. Even if someone tore down the cairns, the iron would still be there. He glanced back, a flicker of confidence in his eyes. "If we can find them, the truth will be on our side." Clara nodded, her fingers tightening on the reins. A strange warmth stirred in her chest. For 3 days she had carried her secret like a stone pressing down on her heart. Now, riding beside him in search of the truth, that weight seemed to lift. In its place grew something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging. Their first stop was a low rise in the northeast corner. Elias swung down from his saddle, moving in careful circles, his hand brushing the grass. Clara dismounted too, her dress snagging on brush, but her eyes sharp with determination. Before long, Elias called out. Here he dropped to his knees, digging into the dirt until the metallic ring of iron answered him. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Relief lit her face. "That's one," she said softly, smiling, and for that moment her smile seemed to push back the gathering dark. They moved on, and at 2 more spots Elias unearthed the buried stakes, each one a victory, each time. Clara could see the tension ease from his shoulders, and each time she felt her own heart grow lighter, riding side by side. They spoke more freely, Clara recalling glimpses of a childhood back east, Elias sharing memories of lonely days, building the ranch from nothing. With the rhythm of hooves beneath them and the prairie stretching wide, the old boundaries between master and servant blurred into something gentler, closer. By nightfall, they reached the final marker, the southeast corner bordering Pierce's land. Here. The ground was torn apart, rocks shattered, grass scorched and trampled. Elias knelt, digging furiously, but found only loose soil and broken stone. No metallic sound. No iron stake. "They pulled it out," he muttered, breath harsh. "Had to use horses to drag it free." Clara knelt beside him, her heart sinking. The fragile flame of hope flickered dangerously low. She reached out, laying her hand on his dirt-streaked arm. 3 stakes remain. They prove you're right. They can't erase every trace of the truth. Elias lifted his eyes to hers. In that instant, the world seemed to fall away, the chirp of crickets, the sigh of wind. It was just the 2 of them, side by side on the contested earth, finding strength in each other's presence. 3 might be enough, he said softly. His voice lost its edge, carrying something almost tender. But even if it isn't, I'll fight. And I'm not alone anymore. Heat rose in Clara's cheeks, but she didn't look away. No, you're not alone, she answered, and in her words lay more than a promise about land. It was a vow against loneliness itself. They rode back under the rising moon, its silver light washing the fields like a blessing. Their horses walked closer now, and more than once Elias's hand brushed against Clara's as he adjusted her reins. Those small touches, whether by chance or fate, sent her heart racing. While Elias felt the weight on his shoulders lighten in a way it hadn't in years. When the ranch house finally came into view, both knew the truth. 3 stakes still buried might or might not win the fight. But what they had discovered out there in the dark, the fragile thread of trust, the closeness born of danger shared, was something far stronger. And it was that bond that would keep them standing when the storm broke. The oil lamp flickered in the small kitchen, throwing pale yellow light across the papers spread over the rough wooden table. Elias Ward sat still, hands braced against the edge, eyes scanning the land maps laid before him. Clara Monroe sat opposite, silent, her fingers laced so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Outside, the night was hushed, but for the wind threading through the cottonwoods. Inside, the air pressed heavy, like the pause before a storm. On their ride earlier, they had uncovered 3 iron stakes, 3 stubborn pieces of truth that refused to be erased. But one was missing, and both knew that come morning, when the crooked surveyor arrived, hope could crumble. Elias dropped his head into his hand, his broad shoulders shuddering faintly. Clara watched him, knowing there was something inside her she could no longer keep hidden. Elias. Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the silence, making him look up. Her eyes trembled but were resolute. "There's something you need to know about me." His brow furrowed, dark eyes narrowing. He was used to her reserve, her careful distance, but tonight she looked different, like a shell about to crack. "My name isn't Clara Monroe," she said, clutching the fabric of her skirt. "It's Clara Cartwright Monroe." The chair groaned as Elias pushed back, jolting upright. "Cartwright," he repeated, astonishment in his voice. Clara nodded, her breath unsteady. "My father was Judge Nathaniel Cartwright Monroe of the Territorial Court. He died 2 years ago. But before he passed, he taught me everything he knew about land law, territorial claims, how to tell a true document from a forgery." Elias froze. The name was not unfamiliar. Nathaniel Cartwright had been known across the territory as a man of iron principle, untouchable by bribes or threats. Even the most powerful men tread carefully around him. And now, the quiet woman who had scrubbed his floors and stirred his stews was his daughter. Why? Elias struggled for words. Why hide it? Clara raised her eyes to his, tears glinting but steady. Because the daughter of a judge does not work as a maid. Clara Cartwright isn't supposed to bend to scrub a floor. Or, her voice faltered, or feel her heart stir for the man she works for. I needed another name. I needed a mask to live quietly, unseen. Her confession fell heavy, slicing the silence. Elias felt something shift deep within, not from her deception, but from the courage it took to bear the truth. In that moment, he no longer saw a servant. He saw a woman who had deliberately stepped away from privilege to carve out her own path, lonely and hard. The room sank into thick silence. Finally, Elias exhaled and lowered himself back into the chair. Clara Cartwright, he repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of it. If that's true, then you know the law better than anyone out here. She nodded faintly. I know how to spot a forged territorial seal. My father showed me every detail, every engraving, every mark. If they bring a false document tomorrow, I can prove it in front of everyone. For a moment, Elias's eyes lit with hope, then shadowed with worry. You're risking too much. If they know who you are, they'll try to break you. They might even... He stopped, unable to speak the darkest thought. Clara's lips pressed tight, her hand trembling but her voice firm. I risked everything the moment I told you this. Elias, I'm not just a messenger, not just some girl who overheard a conversation. I am a witness, and more than that, She drew a steadying breath. "I'm someone who cannot stand by and watch you lose everything." The word struck him like a blow to the chest. Warmth, overwhelming and suffocating, surged through him. He looked at her, not the quiet maid, but Clara herself, fierce and brave, ready to carry the storm alongside him. "Clara," he said softly, his voice rough with feeling. "I don't care what name you carry, or who your father was. I care about the woman sitting here tonight." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but a smile broke through, tender and luminous in the lamplight. In that moment, the gulf between them vanished, replaced by a closeness neither had dared to imagine. And yet along with that closeness came the shocking truth: the secret was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The oil lamp sputtered, casting long shadows across the rough wooden walls. After Clara's confession, silence settled over the kitchen like a heavy quilt. Elias Ward sat unmoving, his hands pressed to the map spread across the table, his eyes fixed on Clara as if trying to decide whether he was still dreaming. Clara Cartwright Monroe. That name still echoed in the air, reshaping everything he thought he knew about her. But Clara didn't let the weight of surprise linger. She drew a steady breath, her hand trembling as she pulled a crumpled paper from her coat. "Elias," she began, her voice firm now, "I have to tell you everything. What I heard and saw in town is worse than you imagine." Elias's head lifted, his eyes flashing like steel catching light. "The surveyor Pierce and Harker are bringing tomorrow." Clara paused, then let the words fall. "He's Silas Crowe's brother-in-law." Elias froze. Brother-in-law. She nodded. 3 days ago. I saw them myself behind the land office. Crowe was with a man in a dark suit carrying survey equipment. I followed close enough to hear. It wasn't business, it was blood. Family. That means tomorrow's report will be nothing but a stage play. The words struck like iron on an anvil. Elias gripped the edge of the table so hard the wood groaned under his fingers. "That isn't all," Clara pressed, her voice gaining strength as though truth itself was fueling her. "When they traded papers, I saw the territorial seal, and I know it was forged." Elias blinked, confusion shadowing his face. Clara laid the paper flat in the lamplight. Though she didn't need to look, every detail was seared into her memory. "My father showed me the difference," she said softly, her tone carrying her back to childhood evenings in Judge Cartwright's study. "The eagle's claw on the olive branch on the true seal. There are 3 talons. The one I saw was missing the center claw. That's a flaw made by counterfeiters when they don't have the original die." Elias leaned back, his storm of thoughts beginning to settle. The scattered pieces, the arrogance of Pierce, Crowe's cold stare, the brazen threats all locked into place. A clear picture at last. "Good Lord," he whispered. "It's all a charade. A charade to steal this land." Clara's chin lifted, her eyes shining with resolve. "Yes. And because I saw it, because I heard them, I can testify. They think I'm just a servant girl, invisible. But they don't know I'm the daughter of the man who wrote the very laws they're twisting." Something sparked in Elias's gaze. He looked at Clara, not the quiet cook, not the maid, but an ally, a fighter with truth and knowledge as her weapons. For a moment, the distance between them vanished. Elias reached across the table, laying his calloused hand over hers, not as master to servant, but as one soul to another. "If you're right," he said softly, "then tomorrow, when they bring those papers, you'll be the one to tear it all apart." Clara gripped his hand back, warmth flooding through her. "I'm ready," she said, and in her deep brown eyes Elias saw it, a rare light in the darkness of the frontier, the light of truth, of justice waiting to prevail. The lamp flame wavered, casting its glow like a witness to their pact. Outside, the night was thick with silence, But within those rough log walls, the conspiracy had been unmasked. And from that truth, a fragile hope rose hope that when the three men arrived tomorrow with their forged documents, Elias and Clara would stand tall, ready to say, "We know everything." That morning dawned earlier than usual, as if the sky itself was eager to witness the truth laid bare. The first light washed the fields in gold, and dew glittered like diamonds on the grass. Yet in the yard of Elias Ward's ranch, the air was strung tight, ready to snap. Clara Monroe adjusted her coat, her eyes steady, her face set with resolve. Last night she had told him everything. This morning she would use that truth to tear down an entire conspiracy. Hoofbeats thundered, sending up clouds of red dust along the trail. Harland Pierce, Jonas Harker, and Silas Crowe arrived, flanked by the surveyor in a dark vest carrying polished instruments. The man dismounted, wearing the smug look of someone convinced he had already won. Ward Pierce barked, "We're here on official business." "Stand aside." Elias stepped forward, tall and unyielding on his own ground. Clara moved with him, shoulder to shoulder. The three men faltered at the sight of her, not hidden in a kitchen or peeking from a window, but standing openly at Elias's side. The surveyor drove in stakes, stretched his lines, made a show of measuring, and finally pulled out a packet of papers stamped with a seal. The performance was quick, rehearsed, designed to end with their victory. Pierce smirked as he thrust the papers forward. "It's done. By law. This land isn't yours anymore." Before Elias could answer, Clara stepped forward, her voice carrying clear across the yard. "No. By law. You are the ones guilty." All eyes turned to her. Clara lifted her hat, revealing a face sharp with authority. "My name is Clara Monroe, daughter of Judge Nathaniel Cartwright Monroe." The name rang like thunder. Pierce froze, Harker flinched, and Crowe's eyes flashed with sudden fury. The surveyor stammered, "That has nothing to... It has everything to do with this." Clara cut him off. She strode forward, snatching the papers from his hand and holding them up to the morning sun. "This territorial seal is a forgery. The eagle's claw is missing the center talon. A counterfeit mark. Plain as day." Elias loomed behind her, his voice booming. "You brought forged papers here to steal 3 years of sweat and blood from me by now." Neighbors had begun gathering at the fence, drawn by the noise. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, then swelled into outrage as Clara's name spread among them. Everyone knew Judge Cartwright's reputation for iron honesty. No one doubted his daughter when she exposed the lie. The surveyor's face turned pale. He backed away, words tumbling. I only did what I was told." "Which makes you complicit," Clara declared, her eyes never leaving him. "And I will report this directly to the marshal." Right then, the sound of more hooves filled the air. The territorial marshal rode up with 2 deputies, his long coat flaring behind him. He had heard rumors of this dispute, but Clara Cartwright's presence left him with no hesitation. "What's happening here?" the marshal demanded. Clara stepped forward and handed him the papers. "Sir, these men staged a false survey with forged territorial documents. I witnessed it myself." The marshal studied the seal, his jaw tightening. "Fake, clear as day." He turned to Pierce, Harker, and Crowe. "You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and falsifying territorial records." The crowd erupted. Elias reached for Clara's hand, not to steady her this time, but to share the surge of triumph. As the cold iron shackles closed around the wrists of the 3 men, the morning seemed brighter, the air lighter. Clara lifted her chin, a quiet smile breaking through, while Elias exhaled the weeks of fear that now scattered like ashes in the wind. Neighbors cheered, some clapping Elias on the back, others congratulating Clara. For the first time in weeks, laughter and celebration rang across the ranch yard. Clara leaned toward Elias, her voice low. "You see, truth is stronger than any gun." Elias looked at her, pride shining in his eyes. "And you're stronger than anyone I've ever known." That morning, under the rising sun, they had won more than a land dispute. They had proved that justice could still triumph over greed and deceit. And in the warm smiles of those around them, Elias and Clara knew they were no longer alone. 6 months had passed since the sound of iron shackles closed around the wrists of Harland Pierce, Jonas Harker, and Silas Crowe. 6 months since that bright morning when justice triumphed over deceit, and truth backed by the cheers of neighbors saved Elias Ward's ranch. Time had not passed lightly, but it had opened a chapter neither Elias nor Clara had dared to dream of. The railroad now cut a line of steel straight through the valley. The first trains roared past, their whistles splitting the once quiet air that had known only wind, cattle, and crows, with every wheel grinding on the rails. The value of Elias's once dismissed land soared. Traders, workers, even investors poured into the valley. In a single season. Elias Ward, the man once seen as a recluse, had become one of the wealthiest landowners in the territory. Yet for Elias, money was not the greatest victory. In the log house that had once been filled with silence, warmth and laughter, now lived. Clara Cartwright Monroe, no longer hiding her name. No longer a shadow in a kitchen, sat in the rocking chair Elias had built with his own hands, sewing a tiny garment for the child soon to come. Beside the window stood a new wooden crib, sunlight spilling across its carved rails like a blessing on their new beginning. Elias came in, his hands still dusted with wood shavings from building a new grain shed. He knelt beside her, laying his rough palm on her rounded belly, where new life stirred. A rare smile broke across his face, softening years of sternness. "You hear that?" he whispered. "It's greeting us already." Clara looked at him, her eyes glowing with quiet joy. "Yes," she said, placing her hand over his. "And this child will grow on land its parents defended with all their hearts. Friends, that image is the heart of the West, not just guns and greed, but hope. New beginnings sprouting even after storms that nearly destroy. Elias had once lived like a hermit, wary of bonds, weighed down by past losses. Clara had once lived like a shadow, hiding her name, burying her knowledge and her courage under an apron. But when their paths crossed, when truths were spoken, and they chose to fight side by side, that was when a true home was built. Today, travelers passing by Elias Ward's ranch see more than fertile land. They hear laughter drifting from the porch. They see a man kneeling beside his wife, steadying a crib, and a woman daughter of a famous judge choosing a simple life, sewing cloth for her firstborn. And isn't that the truest picture? Victory is not measured in fortune, but in a roof overhead, hands joined, and family. Now, let me turn to you, the ones listening from distant porches or gathered around a warm fire. Do you believe Elias and Clara chose the right path should they stay rooted in quiet family life, raising their child in love and justice? Or should they step further, using their new wealth to strengthen the community, to help others resist greed? This is where the story opens to us. If you believe Elias and Clara have earned this happiness, press that like button to keep the flame of these Western tales alive. And tell me in the comments, what should they do next? Expand the ranch, build a school for the valley's children, or become a stronger voice in the territorial courts? One last thought when Elias placed his hand on Clara's belly and the morning sun flooded the room. I realized this story isn't just about fighting fraud. It's proof that after every loss, after every trial, life offers us a new beginning, a new home, a new life, and a new faith in the future. So when you look back on your own journey, perhaps you'll agree happiness isn't always found in grand victories. Sometimes it's in a hand clasped in yours, a warm light glowing from a cabin window, or the cry of a newborn rising into the night air, reminding us all that, no matter how harsh the West may be, life always finds a way to begin again.